access strategies are becoming the enterprise strategies.
A child grows up in a place built on coal and watches it disappear. He learns a hard truth. Some stories don't begin with ambition. They begin with disruption.
You're helping make informed decisions, but to do that, it requires a very deep understanding of the healthcare systems. And I think the other piece we probably don't talk enough about is we're in the business of prediction. We're in the business of anticipation.
He doesn't start where you expect. He runs bars, closes restaurants at midnight, works weekends, learns pressure, people, and crisis the hard way. And then, almost by accident, he steps into healthcare. And what follows isn't a master plan.
You can't be this bulletproof, immaculate, perfect corporate machine every day of the week. So instead of trying to put on a corporate veneer, be yourself, be authentic, be transparent. You know, I was 25 and I thought I just landed a job that people do for life, that people are much older and have to be far more qualified to normally get. I was really enjoying working in the Scottish Government. I was thriving, I was learning, I was enjoying myself, but I decided to resign from that role. And a lot of people at the time said, "You're crazy." But I took the risk of resigning because I was confident.
It's a moral conversation that real leadership shows up not in certainty, but in transparency, vulnerability, and courage.
The responsibility now upon a pricing and access global leadership team to stand up, have an impact, and deliver high quality leadership has never been more important. So I'm hoping to really kickstart that and accelerate that in the next couple of weeks here at Novartis.
What are the beliefs and values that quietly guide you?
I think if you ground yourself in connecting with people, seeing people as human beings first and trying to connect and understand what motivates them, that sets you up with a far more stronger foundation then to lead, build professional relationships and to create a fellowship around you.
We are obviously going through a very turbulent time when it comes to the policies. When things are so uncertain, that prediction becomes a little bit harder. What's your advice for someone who's sort of navigating those challenges?
What the access professionals inside organizations bring is something that I've spoken a lot more about recently. Is I think we have a superpower, and the superpower of these access professionals.
The 16-year-old who started this journey couldn't have imagined where it would lead. The question is, will he succeed in redefining leadership, value, and access for the future of healthcare? This is the story of Gavin Lewis. Gavin, welcome to Drug Diaries. Some stories don't begin with ambition. They begin with disruption. A child grows up in a place built on coal and watches it disappear. Communities fracture, industries collapse, and long before he has a language for it, he learns a hard truth. Economics isn't abstract. It decides who's heard and who's forgotten. At 16, one teacher changes everything. A subject that should have been dull becomes electric. Debate replaces certainty. Curiosity replaces comfort. This is not a story of a straight line. He doesn't start where you expect. He doesn't enter power through prestige. He runs bars, closes restaurants at midnight, works weekends, learns pressure, people, and crisis the hard way. And then, almost by accident, he steps into healthcare. And what follows isn't a master plan, it's a pattern. Leaving security when everything is going well, walking away from comfort to specialize, moving countries, starting again, rebuilding reputation from scratch, each time choosing uncertainty over safety. Today, this person operates at the center of global healthcare in rooms where decisions are made quietly but felt loudly. Decisions where innovation, affordability, and human lives collide. Where there is no perfect answer, only trade-offs. He believes leadership isn't influence, it's responsibility. That pricing isn't just a number, it's a moral conversation. That real leadership shows up not in certainty, but in transparency, vulnerability, and courage. This is not the story of a title, or a company, or a career ladder. It's the story of how values shape decisions, and how decisions shape lives. The 16-year-old who started this journey couldn't have imagined where it would lead. The question now is not how he got here. The question is, will he succeed in redefining leadership, value, and access for the future of healthcare? This is the story of Gavin Lewis. and this is Drug Diaries. Gavin, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you, Kaushik. Really great to be here.
It's an honor and a privilege to have you on Drug Diaries today. Gavin, I strongly believe that behind every title and every corporate leader is a person with a story, often one that explains why they lead the way they do. And in leadership, we often see that people who have faced personal crossroads in their lives bring unique conviction to their roles. So let's start at the beginning. Before you became a senior leader in pharma, who were you and what experiences shaped the way you see the world today?
Yeah, thanks, Kaushik. Great opportunity to sort of reflect on your own journey in life. What resonates when you ask that question, I would go back to probably the 16-year-old Gavin Lewis, or even younger. And I've become much more self-aware that I'm a creature of the South Wales valleys in the UK. And the story goes back to that's an area of the UK that was built on coal. And at a very young age, there was something major in the 1980s that occurred in South Wales, and it was the miners' strike. So a very divisive, provocative time that forced the then, how old would I have been? 7, 8 years old, Gavin, to confront issues of major economic, political, social upheaval that most 8-year-olds may not have confronted. But when you see coal mines closed and strike occurring on your doorstep, it forces you to ask questions and understand things that are very fundamental in terms of economics, politics, and it's an interest, I think, in asking those questions, which really blossomed when I think the other pivotal point in my upbringing was I was very lucky to have a very inspiring and charismatic teacher of economics when I started A-level economics at the age of 16 and made a topic that could have been quite dry and boring incredibly engaging, very discursive, and I've had amazing memories about how I learned economics between the ages of 16 and 18, which ultimately inspired me to choose to do economics at university. So I think that early confrontation with the political upheaval in the UK, and particularly in my specific area of the country when I was a child, and then the chance to explore the sort of theoretical academic construct of some of those principles between the ages of 16 and 18, then inspired me to take it on as an undergraduate choice, going on to university at the age of 18. And I think it went beyond university as well, because the irony I find in my leadership journey was when I finished my university degree in economics and politics, I didn't want anything to do with economics. I found it a little bit overly technical at university. And I actually went into the retail industry. I went into the retail industry for just 1 or 2 years, actually running a bar restaurant, which really kind of exposed me to the realities of customer service, working under pressure, dealing with crisis opportunities, which I think was an incredible experience for a 21-year-old. But what it led to was actually, what is it that I really want to do when it's not closing bars and restaurants at 11, 12 o'clock at night and giving up your weekends? And it was an amazing opportunity that came around the millennium, whereby the Scottish government just inherited new devolved powers, and they were looking for a new civil servants. And so there was an opportunity to join the Scottish government as a trainee economist. So I sort of took the chance of applying for that, and I was very lucky to get the job. And by chance, they put me in the health department in Scotland. So that's where then applying my economics degree in a government department, and by chance I was put into health, and that's where the whole health and economics combination came together. And again, what I've learned through my journey is you need inspiring managers and leaders around you, which I've hopefully gone on to role model. And again, when I joined the government as a brand new trainee economist, there was a health economist professor who was my manager. And I learned to apply the technical analysis that I'd learned in a real practical and political setting. So I was doing statistical analysis to inform public policy. And that really then grounded me in applying economics, in answering policy, big policy questions, but also then how you translate that technical work into briefings for lay people, I think really helped me, with hindsight, lay the foundation of my career in translating and communicating technical economics into impactful, policy relevant, strategic decision making.
Right. And when you were studying economics, did you ever imagine that you're going to have one day such a significant contribution to the pharmaceutical world and the industry?
No, is the simple answer. I think, how my career has progressed is you're always taking one step at a time. And I still
Yes.
remember the day when I got my first job in industry as a health economist. You're overwhelmed with a sense of pride and achievement, and you actually see that role as something that is for people that are far older than you. I was 25
Yes.
and I thought I just landed a job that people do for life, that people are much older and have to be far more qualified to normally get. So you can't see beyond just being able to do that job. And early in your career, you think, well, this is a job I can do for 10, 15, 20 years. I think whether that's because maybe you're naturally humble or you underestimate your own potential, you never sit there. Look at a global head of Access at the time, Lou Garrison, a very inspiring individual I'm still in contact with at Roche, and think, yeah, I'm going to sit in his seat one day.
Right.
It's not something I set off on. It was more an iterative journey of doing the best job you can at the time and then see what doors open. And fortunately, I went on a great journey after that and many doors opened.
Gavin, what are the beliefs and values that quietly guide you? The ones that don't show up on LinkedIn but influence every major decision you make?
I always like to say that we're human beings first, and we're sort of corporate employees and leaders and performers second. So I think if you ground yourself in connecting with people, seeing people as human beings first and trying to connect and understand what motivates them, I think that sets you up with a far more stronger foundation then to lead, build professional relationships and to create a fellowship around you. So I think I always keep that very much front of mind. And I think going back to my story of being brought up in the 1980s in South Wales, it brought me a very acute dislike of inequalities. And when you're dealing in healthcare and you see health inequalities around the world or within a certain country, to try and reduce those and make a difference, I think is something that goes to my roots. And I think there's a link between that then in terms of also what I like to bring to my teams and to leadership in general, where I like to give a voice to the underdog or to speak on behalf of people who don't have a voice. So I think that's something that very much grounds me in terms of trying to do the right thing and representing those people that may not have that voice in terms of how things work or how the company is making decisions or how the department is run. And so being very, very mindful of those people that you serve. So that sort of servant leadership style is something I think I live and breathe.
And Gavin, leadership in pharma is often painted as a story of influence. But behind closed doors, it's actually about trade-offs, balancing affordability, innovation, and patient need. And there's a research that shows that healthcare leaders face some of the highest moral stress of any industry, the weight of decisions where no answer is perfect. So, is there a decision you've made in your career that kept you up at night? And if so, what did you learn from it?
Yeah, in terms of career decisions, I think the two pivotal ones that I think that set my career on a certain trajectory was having to make a decision to leave somewhere when everything is actually going very well. They talk about fixing the roof when the sun is shining, but I look back and I think what really accelerated my progression and allowed me to achieve what I've achieved was I was really enjoying working in the Scottish government. I was thriving, I was learning, I was enjoying myself, but I decided to resign from that role to go and do my postgraduate qualification in health economics and specialize. And a lot of people at the time said, you're crazy, you got a great job in the government, you're doing really well. But I took the risk of resigning because I was confident that with that postgraduate qualification, given what was happening in the world at the time, that would create even more options for me in the future. And I think with hindsight, if I hadn't done that, things would have looked very differently. And I think the other one that was a big decision was I spent the first 10 years in industry working in the UK for Roche. And I'd become that UK leader in access, good reputation. I was an expert on the healthcare system, well established within the company. And again, I had a chance to leave Roche UK, move to the global headquarters in Basel, and take on a completely new role that didn't have a job description, not welcomed by some people in the organization. And that felt like a huge gamble as well. And again, leaving somewhere where you feel comfortable, established, everything's going well. And what I've passed on to other people now is when you make that major move to leave a country, you're almost hitting self-destruct on your own entire, not just job but your life. You change
Yes.
your home, you can change schools for children, you lose the immediate professional network, you have to start building your reputation from scratch, you learn an entire new potential language, and you learn an awful lot about yourself. So taking the courage, and I pass this on to anyone in industry, to sort of move out of your home country if you have the opportunity, it really challenges, and you learn something new about yourself. That's the other key thing. You when you remove everything from around you and
Yeah.
you have to rebuild it from scratch,
Mhm.
you become much more conscious about what are those things that you need around you to be successful, be happy, that you probably wouldn't have understood if you just remained in the same spot. So I think, yeah, stepping out of government to do a postgraduate qualification, which opened me up to industry, and then after 10 years in one market, moving into an above country role, and the whole change that of mindset and lifestyle that creates in you really evolved me as a leader and a human being.
And how do you lead when the answers aren't obvious? When you're dealing with ambiguity or competing interests or ethical dilemmas?
Yeah, I think we've never been more tested in that skill set than in the last 12
Yeah.
months in industry. I think obviously a lot of the policy direction and decisions occurring in the US administration is really shaking up industry, and particularly in the pricing and access area. It's been a huge period of how do you deal with ambiguity as a leader. You want to bring direction, you want to bring clarity, but you can't because there was so much uncertainty and lack of final decision
Yeah.
making on what the future could look like, that it was, creating a lot of anxiety in organizations and within your immediate team. So I think as a leader, what I've learned over time is be as transparent as possible. Even if you don't know, say you don't know, and just stay close, regular communication, and be as open as possible. That then hopefully brings out the authentic leader that we all want to be. So transparency is very important value in these times. But I think the other piece which I've learned to value and flex a lot more as a leader is just be vulnerable. Also, within reason, say what's going on in your mind. And at
Yes.
times throughout the last 12 months, I've had to try and be much more open and vulnerable that, I don't have all the answers. I'm also feeling uncertain and anxious about this. And then through that, indirectly, you become a little bit more relatable. Teams can connect with you. So, instead of trying to put on a corporate veneer, be yourself, be authentic, be transparent, and be vulnerable in terms of what you're feeling. We all feel insecurities. We all have self-doubts. But I think sometimes you come from cultures where it's not seen as positive to talk about that. But I think the more you can show to teams that you wake up some mornings and maybe you don't have the right energy, or you are feeling less certain about yourself, or you've come away from a meeting or a presentation where you think, I didn't do very well today and I've got doubts now, and do people think I'm as high performing, and is my reputation, taking a dip? It's that inner voice and that inner narrative that we all have. I think as a leader, as you mature, you learn to deal with that a lot better, and you realize that we all have these moments. Even the biggest, strongest, most successful looking leaders around the world, they will have their moments of insecurities and doubts. And I think the more we can be open and honest about sharing that, I think I've had a lot of good feedback in terms of that changes a lot in terms of how leaders are seen, that you can't be this bulletproof, immaculate, perfect corporate machine every day of the week. Behind the scenes, there's a lot going on that people are not as comfortable talking about as I think we should be. So I think being that open, vulnerable leader, I think makes you more relatable. It's a greater fellowship and loyalty. And I think for me as well, almost selfishly, you feel a bit more comfortable in your own skin. I always speak about, I know when I'm in a good environment and I know I'm in a very happy place, is you, as they say, let your guard down. You feel open, trusting to express yourself. So I think that's a long answer, but I think it's
Very well
brings
said.
about a lot about being your authentic self as a leader as well.
That's such a profoundly inspiring reflection from you, Gavin. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I believe that in market access and value strategy leadership roles, one of the toughest things is to balance affordability, sustainability, and innovation when developing pricing and reimbursement strategies. How do you approach that balance?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, really, in terms of the science and the art of pricing and access in industry. And I think what's allowed me, to be inspired to stay in this area throughout my entire 25 years as an economist is trying to optimize those very trade-offs you've described, because it's not only a fascinating intellectual and academic question of how you do that, but it's also filled with incredible emotions around allowing and enabling patients to access new innovative therapies, but also in incredibly, no more so in the last 12 months, highly politicized environments where you're dealing with, for my exact role, 15 sovereign healthcare systems across countries that are in their own rights determining what they believe is the value of innovation, the value of new medicines, and they have their own right to determine what that is. So when you hold a mirror up to 115 different ways of valuing a medicine, it's how do you begin to develop a strategy for a single medicine that may rely on one study, need one pricing strategy is very difficult. It's very complex. And I think going back to some of my comments on being vulnerable, you're never going to get it right. And it's never going to be perfect. I think that's the unfortunate reality of what we do. So how I like to approach it is, again, building on transparency, is initially take a very bottom-up approach. So in as many markets as you see feasible, ask the question, what is it that's needed from an evidence, from a pricing point of view, and just hold a mirror up to see how variable that is, how wide-ranging that is. And when you start to do that, our role, I think, that is very pivotal in driving the entire strategy of organizations is characterizing what the options are and what the trade-offs that we face will be. If you go for this study or if this pricing strategy, this is the likelihood of achieving access, and this is where you will get access or you may not get access. So you're helping make informed decisions. But to do that, it requires a very deep understanding of the healthcare systems. And I think the other piece we probably don't talk enough about is we're in the business of prediction. We're in the business of anticipation. And I talk a lot about anticipatory leadership is what makes great access leaders. It's about taking a target product profile of a medicine that may be 10 years away from market. And you need to advise senior leaders to say, okay, how will a government in 10 years' time look at that medicine and what is the willingness to pay for that medicine? And you need to be able to look into the future and predict what that is. So understanding trends in policy, understanding the evolution of health technology methods, all has to be synthesized into making these predictions and then making a commitment to a certain study design and making assumptions on what prices we think governments will be willing to pay for these medicines that may be 10 years away. So the business of prediction is something that is a key competency of access leaders and something we probably haven't shined enough light upon as a skill set.
And as you rightly mentioned in one of your responses, that we are obviously going through a very turbulent time when it comes to the policies. And when things are so uncertain, that prediction becomes a little bit harder, especially if you look at the MFN policy and the recent changes that we have seen. What's your advice for someone who's sort of navigating those challenges? And how would you advise them to plan in such an uncertain environment?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, there's a bit of a paradox at play at the moment in that it seems like everything's changing, but I think this is where my advice is going. Some things will remain constant. And I believe what the access professionals inside organizations bring is something that I've spoken a lot more about recently is I think we have a superpower. And the superpower of these access professionals is we understand and can characterize the link between evidence, value, and price. And that continuum is something that is so key to defining the commercial success of industry. It's access leaders that can technically understand that link and advise on optimizing that link. And despite all the changes we've seen around us, and it is occurring right now and will occur throughout the rest of 2026, that continuum and how you optimize that for a new scientific breakthrough in terms of collecting the right evidence, translating and communicating that into value that is of relevance to the customer, to then create a reward for that innovation that allows industry to reinvest in R&D, still remains the North Star of what we do. And how I try and help inspire, mobilize access and attract people into access is It's this function, I think, alone, maybe provocative in that claim, that has the superpower to define and characterize that link. And that will remain a constant. And I would say if you still remain laser focused on creating true value for your customer, then the rewards will follow, and it will differentiate you from both competition and from other medicines and products that may be much more commoditized in the future. So I think that would be my quick bit of reflective advice on that. Tough question.
So in any story, there's a turning point, a moment after which nothing looks the same. In pharma, this might be the arrival of a new therapy, a global policy shift, or a personal realization about purpose. And the best leaders don't just survive these moments, they let them redefine how they work. So, has there been a moment in your life or career that completely changed the way you think about business, about purpose, or about success?
I guess it inspires a few thoughts in my mind. I think, and it may be relating more to how I saw leadership, and what I think defines success, both as a leader, but also as leading access teams. And I think one moment that sticks out amongst many that I think was a real aha moment. I spoke earlier about moving countries and taking on a brand new leadership role that was new, setting up a new department. So it was setting up the first ever Region Europe organization for Roche in market access. And I remember waiting quite a long time for my first one-to-one with my new boss. He was gracious enough to give me the opportunity and select me to lead that brand new function. And I remember going into that one-to-one, and I must have been about 35 years old, having led access in the UK for 10 years, mastered that healthcare system. I think I did 50 nice health technology appraisals. And I walked into that one-to-one finally, and I said to my boss, what do you want this role to focus on, and what are the main priorities? And I was incredibly dissatisfied at the time with the answer I got, but it was an incredible learning and moment in leadership. And my boss, who I'm very happy to say was a fantastic, charismatic leader who I've got a lot to thank for, Peter Hoog, turned around and said, you tell me, Gavin. And at the time I thought, that's a terrible answer. You know, you've invested in me coming to do this. You're investing in a new department and you don't have one idea of what you wanted to do. And the penny dropped very quickly that in a very flattering way, Peter was telling me, you know best. You know this area. You have seen what's working, what's not. You tell me what the priorities are. And whilst that's a very simple example, I need to rely on that principle, and I come back to that principle almost on a weekly basis as a leader, that your role as a leader is much more about helping people flourish, allowing them to go on a journey of discovery to bring forth the solutions and the ideas. Because if you try and top down fix everything for every solution, then you'll quickly overwhelm yourself as a leader, and you just don't nurture and develop the talent that you need to develop. So a small little story, but that stuck with me incredibly well, as you can see, some many years later. And I think the second reflection to your question, which is a much more kind of day-to-day piece I'm working on now, is the market access space is a sort of classic area of technical experts. That's how our brand is, I would say. Our external brand, our internal brand is as a health economist, you're a technical person. And I think some of the bias that you confront then is, therefore, you're maybe not natural leaders. You're not good communicators. You're a little bit more introvert. And I think that whether you call it a bias, a prejudice, or even a fact, is something that is felt very strongly, I think, by access and health economists as a professional. And I think I've made it my sort of professional life ambition to try and evolve and change that brand image and leading by example. And I think very tactically, the one aha moment and learning moment, which I think is come too late in my career, is around communication. And I think as a profession and as an individual, we've totally undervalued the skill of storytelling.
Yeah.
I think almost culturally and how we're trained is you produce data, you put it in a slide deck, and you give a presentation of that data, and that's enough. Then everybody should understand who you are, what you do, and what the answer is. And I think the mindset shift that is not enough. And there is something positive to embrace about how you tell a story. To do yourself justice, to do your work justice, to do the function justice is something I'm really trying to accelerate now, and trying to sort of rid the team of the sort of, again, bias that sort of skill and storytelling in general, that's for sales reps or that's for marketing to be good at. And we just focus on the data and we stay grounded in the facts. You can do all that, but you can still tell a great story. And I think it's learning and advising and coaching and creating a culture that embraces that as a way of enhancing what we do. I'm not too late, but it's something I discovered, I think, far too late in my career. But it's never too late, as they say. And I'm looking forward to making big impacts with that addition to my sort of leadership focus moving forward.
Right. Well, that's a great reflection. Thank you for sharing that. And Gavin, is there something you've had to unlearn in order to grow?
I think it's, for me personally, it's learning the value of speed and simplicity. I think, again, given how you're brought up as an economist, we like facts, we like time to analyze, we like to see all the options. You'd like to take your time and then make a recommendation. And I think in the world of business and in corporations, and just learning to value different personality and leadership styles that are around you that might work very differently, that you have to adapt, and you can't always follow that formula and have the luxury of time. So reprogramming your own way of working, your own sort of natural muscle and style of approaching a problem and making a decision is something I've had to work harder on, to unlearn that sort of iterative, show me the facts, let's look at the options, let's make a recommendation. I think you could still stay true to that as a strength, but you've got to really challenge yourself to move with speed. And something I'm valuing much, much more now in my career is keep things simple. Don't over-engineer, and that can help then actually create the speed and the clarity for your teams.
And here's where Gavin's story connects directly with the future of healthcare. Consider this. By 2030, it's estimated that global spending on healthcare will exceed $10 trillion. The way we structure access, financing, and innovation today will decide who gets life-changing therapies tomorrow. And that makes market access not just a technical role, but a societal one. So, Gavin, how do you see the role of market access evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, especially with the rise of value-based healthcare models?
I mean, this is the thing that probably inspires me most right now as I sort of move into my second year with Novartis and my 25th as an economist. Why I've stayed so loyal and fascinated by this part of industry. Being that long involved in this particular function industry has allowed me the privileged seat to see its evolution over time. And when you lead large organizations like I can, then you have a hand in shaping that evolution and hopefully accelerating that evolution in the right direction. And that is something that I see as one of my core, if not primary roles. And what I'm seeing when I answer that sort of question, which I find personally inspiring, and I'm hoping my team are right behind in that inspiration as well, is I honestly believe that access strategies are becoming the enterprise strategies for organizations. And that's not just because that's what Gavin wants or that's a self-interest of an access organization. I believe that's what the external environment is telling industry, that the value of a medicine is becoming one of the primary drivers of its success. And as healthcare systems get ever more sophisticated in their methods of assessing value, they're more professionalized in their procurement methods, it's becoming one of the core drivers of commercial growth. So if you do a great job, this is what I tell my team, of defining a market access strategy, it's consuming a far, far greater proportion of your overall true enterprise product strategy. Because when you think about it, access professionals can help shape and design and define what type of clinical trial will really drive commercial success, because it's the characteristics of those trials as viewed by health technology assessments and payers that ultimately will define the price of that medicine. So we also help shape and define what the unmet need of that product is. We recommend the price and understand the volume trade-offs. And the precision in the differentiation messages as well is something that is a massive part of the access strategies. So when you put all that together, it becomes a far greater proportion of your enterprise strategy than it ever did before. So the challenge is upon us then is, how do you accept that responsibility? How do you modify your leadership style to ensure that that weight of responsibility in defining the success of the enterprise is brought to the table by market access that may have historically been a little bit more in the shadows? A more passive advisor now has to be that strategic thought leader, not just driving a discrete pricing and access strategy, but drives and shapes the overall enterprise strategy. So access strategies becoming enterprise strategies, I think, is a very strong principle which helps me shape and guide my team and the overall evolution, I believe, of access inside industry.
And according to you, what emerging trends in healthcare financing and reimbursement will shape the future of access?
I think for me, the big macro driver and area of uncertainty is, and very much provoked by the US policy changes we've seen around most favored nations, it's challenging all countries now to ask a more fundamental question of how much do they value investment in healthcare? How big a proportion of their overall tax base, their GDP, should be allocated to healthcare? What is the right amount? What is it that society wants to invest in healthcare? And how much do we value, measure, and hold people to account on improving health outcomes? And I think we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of whether or not that is answered in a very positive, progressive, forward-looking way by governments around the world in the next months that will determine how well medicines are valued moving forward. And I think that's the fascinating debate that's been created in the last 12 months, is asking some of those more fundamental questions around how we value medicines and how much of our income from a country point of view should be invested in healthcare.
I think MFN is changing the rules of the game quite rapidly, and especially I see a profound impact of MFN on the launch sequencing and the launch planning. If, let's say, if the company decides to launch a product in Europe, then it'll set a precedence for the US price, and that's why I think there'll be a lot of decisions that'll have to be made in regards to launch sequencing.
Yeah, I think one angle that MFN has shone a light upon is a topic that has always existed, but has probably not been discussed as openly as it is now, and that is of price differentiation. Prices are different across different countries across the world, and that is not a surprise when you consider every country has a sovereign right over determining its healthcare, over how it values medicines. So it's going to come out with different willingness to pay for medicines, but also the reality of there's a huge variation in the ability to pay in terms of the relative wealth of different nations. So if you're going to ensure and try and help all patients across those countries have access to medicines, you have to be able to differentiate prices across those countries. So when you have any construct that starts to harmonize prices, which could be seemingly a well-intended aspiration, you can very quickly run into access issues if you are unable to differentiate prices across different healthcare systems. So I think that, for me, is one of the interesting angles to what MFN is raising a profile upon. And going back to my earlier point, it is starting to highlight some of those anomalies between price levels in very wealthy countries versus price levels in less wealthy countries, and what is a fair and correct way of distributing prices so that there is a fair payment for the overall investment in R&D. So they are very fair, legitimate questions, but there is a tension between individual country sovereignty to determine the value of medicines and what may appear at a cross-country level sound set of principles. There's a genuine conflict there between those two realities.
And on the topic of legacy, I would like to say this, that 20 years from now, most of the drugs we use today will be replaced. But the impact today's leaders, the system they've built, the trust they've created, the values they stood for, that will remain. And legacy isn't about the products, it's about the people. So, Gavin, looking back 10 to 20 years from now, what would make you proud of the work you're doing today?
I mean, for me, I like to think I've been a really strong role model in demonstrating that as a market access professional, as a health economist, you can be both technically very competent, but also a very savvy commercial and business leader. And also, similarly, you can be a technically grounded individual that may be a little bit more introvert by personality type, but can still be a very charismatic, inspiring, and impactful leader. And I think evolving that brand image of market access and health economists in a direction that I think is more representative of what we truly deliver for patient access, for industry, I'd like to believe I'm role modeling that and personifying that and helping move that function into and continue evolving it into a more strategic leader and thought leader and less a reactive, passive technical function. And I think I'm still very much work in progress on that. But being part of that journey is I think my biggest privilege, my biggest inspiration, and I hope will be one of my biggest legacies moving forward.
And I totally agree. And I'm sure thousands of people watching this episode would agree that you perfectly embody the attributes and the characteristics that you just spoke about. And it's so inspiring. I think you are such an inspiration to all of us in the life sciences space. So thank you for what you're doing and how you're setting the bar high for everyone around you.
Thank you, Vic, very much, Kaushik. And I think just to build on that, I think access professionals are far more versatile than we're given credit for. And I think, what I've taken great pride upon, and I think we need to do a lot more of it at scale, is exporting access professionals into more generalist management roles as well. I'm one of these sort of folks that have stayed true and stayed in the one function. And again, I hope I can be a good inspiration to say that it's not a bad thing if you want to stay loyal and remain and spend your entire career in access. I hope I'm a good role model in that. But when you come back to the point I tried to make earlier, that I truly believe great enterprise strategies are now becoming more and more dominated by an access component, and the access strategy and enterprise strategies converging, that can only create more opportunities for access leaders to go on to be great leaders of countries and even future CEOs of large organizations, because the big component that drives commercial success moving forward is swinging more and more to the skills and the competencies of access issues, challenges, and solutions. The versatility of access leaders is something also I'm very passionate about. And we continually, I think, to positively improve examples as well as the sort of brand image of that.
Gavin, if your future grandchildren asked what you stood for, what would you want them to say?
I like to think, and one of the things I'm working on really hard right now is the value of creating a safe environment and a speak up culture. I think we've all worked in environments before where it doesn't feel safe or welcome to be your true self and speak up. So that's something I'm valuing an awful lot at the moment, and understanding how you create that, because I think by doing that, you create the right diversity of opinions, which you benefit from as a leader, but you also create an environment where people truly enjoy themselves and can be their true selves. And in doing so, to answer your question from a grandchildren point of view, I really like to feel like I can support and speak for those people that are not in as privileged position to speak and represent themselves in the forums that I can participate and be present at. And I think one of the North Star sort of famous people and the quotes that I've learned to really embrace that helps role model what I do and speaks to this culture that I personally value and therefore I bring into my teams is by Martin Luther King, where he speaks about, the ultimate tragedy is not the harm done by the cruel people. It's the silence of the good people watching on. And I think that is such a powerful way of, creating the need and the value of speaking up and empowering and giving people confidence and an opportunity to do that. And I think whether it's a team, whether it's in a sporting environment or whether it's in a business environment, the more you can ensure that exists, the healthier and the more effective and the higher performing both the business, I think, and teams in general are. And I think for me, if I can be someone who is seen as championing those values and being a leader that is seen to have people's back in those moments to do the right thing. I'd love that to be something I can talk proudly about with my grandchildren.
And with the sort of culture that you're building within the organization, do you think your team feels comfortable in voicing their opinion and talking freely about their concerns or thoughts?
Well, given how often my leadership team meetings overrun, then that could be one positive indication. Or I just need to run them a bit more with a bit more discipline. And I'm very excited, actually. On a practical note, I've got my kind of first leadership team offsite in a couple of weeks' time, where I've had a lot of new starters coming to join Novartis. So it's like a brand new leadership team, 18 months into my Novartis journey, where, we're going to tease that out and go deep for 3 days in understanding, who we are as individuals, what do we want to become as a leadership team, and the amazing opportunity that lies ahead, given what's happened in the external world. So just when I think I need a fresh shot of energy after 20-something years in industry and price and access, and at January time as well, after a long Christmas break, you take a step back and you think, wow, given MFN, given I've got many new leaders joining my leadership team, you put those two together and there's still a huge opportunity of fresh new excitement in terms of what needs to be done. And for all the reasons I've said earlier, the responsibility now upon a pricing and access global leadership team to stand up, have an impact, and deliver high quality leadership has never been more important. So I'm hoping to really kickstart that and accelerate that in the next couple of weeks here at Novartis.
Right. And Gavin, what belief do you hold so strongly that almost no one around you agrees with?
This may repeat something I've said earlier, but I think there's two things. I think access or market access professionals have a unique superpower, the ability to translate clinical evidence into value and value into price is a skill set unique to the market access community. And that is a superpower that is never more important than today and will increasingly become the dominant driver and thought leadership required to create commercial success in the future for industry. And I think that's something that I truly believe. I don't expect everyone to agree with, but it certainly creates a lot of passion, inspiration, and positive mobility to evolve as an organization, as a function, as leaders.
Gavin, when things get difficult, what ideas or principles do you come back to?
I think a problem shared is a problem halved. So again, I've got a lot better at the vulnerability and sharing things that are difficult and being human in, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know the answer. What are we going to do about this? And surrounding yourself by talented people to help support and come up with those solutions. And I think when you show that trust and when you share some of your innermost insecurities or doubts, that creates a bond with people around you, and it creates a trust and it creates motivation and excitement to solve some of those complex problems. So I think that's, learnings in life is don't internalize. We can internalize too many things and that can make problems and challenges far worse in terms of getting them in the right scale and the right proportion, but also coming up with ideas and positive energy when you're confronted with those things. So I think definitely sharing more and as much as is appropriate. And I think the other piece is how you manage your own energy. I think that's absolutely critical. So having that healthy work-life balance and knowing when to recharge, disconnect, and how to manage your overall personal energy and battery levels is probably something that we continue to practice and I can always get better at.
What's something people don't know and would be surprised to learn about you?
I guess when people get to know me, what sometimes surprises people when they see and understand what type of access leader I am is I'm quite a big introvert. And again, as part of learning yourself as a leader, you learn to embrace and understand your leadership style. And understanding what it means to be an introvert has been a journey in itself. And I got a lot of self-confidence from embracing it, because one of the best lessons I was told, which is a bit 101 when it comes to sort of leadership styles, is, an introvert is more about where you get your energy from. And I hopefully turn up and show up as very engaged, charismatic, inspiring within my day job, but to get my energy back and to manage yourself, which I think becomes almost the biggest driver of your performance as a leader, is how you get to manage effectively your own personal energy. Because, how I show up and be effective at work isn't whether I know the answer to this complex question or whether I understand what the latest evolution of the German healthcare system is. It's how I feel as Gavin walking through those gates every morning. And as a leader, the more you can get to understand and predict, well, what is it that needs to be going on in my life in totality for me to show up with that inspiring clarity and energy in the workplace is more and more a focus of your time, I think, as you mature as a leader, and you try and carve out more of your time to understand what it is and manage your calendar and your diary so that it is working for you as a total package as a human being, not just in terms of a machine that turns up and says interesting things at meetings.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question, when I in part define myself as an introvert, I know to recharge my battery and recover after you've done those big moments on stage or you've delivered those big presentations, I need a bit of solitude. I need the quiet time. I'll want to ride my bicycle on a beautiful sunny morning,
Yeah.
and I know I need a bit of that to recover, to recharge, and then I can come back and be my best self. So some people are sometimes surprised to say, okay, wow, you call yourself an introvert. Well, yes, I like a bit of solitude. I need some solitude to be at my best. And if I don't, if I see a long number of weeks without those opportunities, I know I start getting in a mindset and a frame of mind where I'm not at my best. And that's not good for everybody. So I think that self-awareness about how you manage your energy and what you need around you is something that you can only get better and better as you mature as a leader.
And I think there's a stark difference between the introverts and the extroverts. I think the extroverts, when they go out and meet with the people, they gain energy, whereas the introverts, they lose it when they are in crowd. And it's quite kind of overwhelming for, I'm an introvert too myself, and I feel totally drained when I'm in crowded places, when I'm speaking to a lot of people at the same time. I'm great one-on-one, but speaking to a crowd becomes a bit overwhelming for me.
Yeah. But just being able to speak openly about that, be transparent and vulnerable and not see it as a weakness is one example of something that, culturally and historically has not always been well understood, and how you have those type of conversations with your team members and not just how's the global value dossier for X, Y, and Z coming along and what do you know about this, and that is, I think, one of the biggest arts of leadership, and recognizing that what drives your performance is so much more based on that energy and that motivation and that inspiration. And having that at its optimal level, what drives that is far more complex than thinking about what are the technical competencies that these people need and why they are or are not performing at their best. And I think the more we talk about that and understand what those formulas are, those drivers are, I think it positively graze the area between the realities of the corporate workplace and who we are as human beings. And I think, when you spoke about legacy earlier, I think that's the human leadership that I need as an individual, but then I bring unapologetically into my workplace and my teams, which I think can also differentiate me from other leaders, because it brings in that reality of life, the vulnerabilities that we feel, and trying to create that speak up culture where we can be more open about that. Because if we can support each other in unlocking what those drivers are and what we need around us in terms of the culture of the team, the way we work, the volume of meetings, the areas we focus on, it's going to create happier, more high performing people. You realize, I think, your role as a leader is much more about that and not just answering those difficult strategic questions.
Very well said. I totally agree. And Gavin, what's the worst advice you've ever followed?
The worst advice. I think the worst advice I've ever followed is relating to recruitment and selection of talent. And that is, in general, not trusting your own personal instinct. So you can take well-intended advice from other people in terms of who they believe is right for the job. And if these are potentially very influential, big, important people and people you respect, sometimes you put too much weight on that rather than your own personal feelings inside that stomach. And I think that sometimes has led to regret, because ultimately, if you're accountable for that individual, you have to work with that person. They are going to help you deliver on things that you are accountable for. You've got to own that sort of decision. And I think in the past, taking advice off other people on who or you should or shouldn't recruit has probably been bad advice when it is going against what your stomach is telling you.
Yeah. And Kevin, if your closest friends described you in one word, what would it be? And would you agree?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say closest friends. It's quite an emotional statement because know your mind immediately goes to those people. And I'm definitely one of those individuals that has one or two, three at most, I would call close friends, but they're very deep and very long in terms of connections. And I think I'd certainly characterize myself as that way inclined towards friendship rather than dinner parties every week with, a group of 40, casual friends that I have. So
Wow.
that's an interesting first thing I'm thinking of when I think about friends that truly represent friends to me. And I think if there was just one word that they would call me, that's interesting. I think it's more of a phrase. I would say you always end up landing on your feet. And these are school friends that probably know me for a very long time and seen my life journey. And I think I have been fortunate in terms of when adversity happens or you make decisions that seem risky, that things have worked out very positively. And I think they see a pattern there that they then maybe mock me for or satirize me around. But yeah, someone who always ends up falling on their feet is probably a phrase that they would point towards me.
That says a lot about you as a person, as a leader. The ability to bounce back, the resilience, and may not be knowing what's right on the first instance, but eventually figuring out. I think that's such an amazing quality, and I wish I had that too. Right. So that brings us to the end of our today's conversation, Gavin. And I believe every meaningful conversation leaves us with more to reflect on than to resolve. And today wasn't just a discussion about market access or strategy. It was a conversation about values, responsibility, and what it really means to lead when the stakes are human. Gavin, your story, from the experiences that shaped you to the decisions that tested you and the vision you hold for future of healthcare, offers something rare, a perspective on how innovation meets humanity, on how leadership is less about certainty and more about courage, and on how the choices made quietly behind the scenes can change lives in very visible ways. So thank you so much for your generosity, for your honesty, for your authenticity, and for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's been a real privilege having you on Drug Diaries.
My pleasure, Kaushik. Really unique conversation and really nice privilege to take such a broad and indulgent reflection. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Such an honor.